Good evening, I'm Adrienne Arsenault.
And I'm Andrew Chang. 48 hours after its polls began closing, a divided U.S. idles at a crossroads.
Stop the cheat! Stop the cheat!
Count every vote! Count every vote!
As the ballot count drags on tonight, Americans are asking, we are all wondering, which way will it turn?
Democracy is sometimes messy. It sometimes requires a little patience as well.
The focus, just a small handful of states, from the north to the south to the western desert. But patience isn't everywhere.
You're not worried about division?
It's long overdue, another civil war in this country, in all honesty.
In the face of such deep animosity, can the next president, as yet unknown, bring any unity?
This is a special edition of The National.
And this is the end goal, the White House. Tonight, the work continues to figure out who will be in it for the next 4 years.
Will it be Donald Trump or Joe Biden? No answer yet.
In the United States and around the world, this process is testing everyone's patience. After 2 days, no candidate has yet reached 270 Electoral College votes.
Yeah, and that's creating a lot of exhaustion, frustration, and anger. Today, both Donald Trump and Joe Biden spoke to Americans. Their messages couldn't have been more different.
I ask everyone to stay calm, all the people to stay calm. The process is working.
This is a case where they're trying to steal an election. They're trying to rig an election.
Away from the bluster, scenes like this, ballots being counted one by one, states saying they're aiming for accuracy over speed. After all, the margins separating Trump and Biden are, in some places, razor thin.
So tracking every move in this ever-changing story, our reporters fanned out across the U.S. in Delaware with the Biden campaign, in Washington keeping an eye on the Trump campaign, and in key states still in limbo, Pennsylvania, Georgia, and Arizona. But let's start with the numbers. Vote counters are working through the last remaining ballots in those contested states. So Ian is here to bring us up to speed on where things stand. Ian?
Adrienne, exactly 24 hours ago, I was telling you there were 6 states undecided. Well, right now there are still 6 states undecided, but we are learning a lot more about how this race is going. So let's assume for a moment that Alaska will go on the Republican side of the ledger. That's almost a certainty. And for the purpose of argument, let's assume North Carolina will as well. That leaves 4 absolutely pivotal states in this race for the White House, beginning with Pennsylvania, 20 electoral college votes. And every time we get new results from Pennsylvania, it gets closer and closer and closer. That's because Joe Biden, as expected, the Democrats, as expected, voted overwhelmingly in the advance mail-in ballots, and those are counted last. So it's looking really good for Joe Biden there. He would win the White House if he wins Pennsylvania. For Donald Trump, though, it is a must-win. Trump also has to win the next couple of states we're going to take a look at. Georgia, he is in the lead, has been in the lead. I know percentage-wise 49.4%, but a sliver of a lead still for Donald Trump. Just 1% of the votes to be counted there. And again, the more that gets counted, the better it's looked for Joe Biden. But Trump's still in the lead. 2 more states I want to quickly show you, because this is a state that Joe Biden is leading in. Donald Trump has to win at least one of these to win the White House. We expect more votes in from Las Vegas, that area. That should favor Joe Biden. But this is the really tricky one coming up now. Arizona. Yes, Joe Biden is in the lead, but this is a different trend line than we've seen in places like Pennsylvania. More votes being counted have actually favored Donald Trump. And Adrienne and Andrew, according to the Secretary of State of Arizona, we will have a much more clear picture, that's an exact quote, in Arizona tomorrow.
Ah, tomorrow. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Now, President Trump did speak at the White House earlier this evening, making a number of unsubstantiated claims and accusations against Democrats, electoral workers, the media, pollsters. Paul Hunter was in the room. So, Paul, where do we start?
Look, this is Donald Trump being Donald Trump. It's how he's campaigned. In effect, this may be his explanation for why he may lose.
Tonight, from Donald Trump, defiance, speaking to reporters at the White House with a list of grievances and Trump's rationale for why he's losing. The election rigged against him, blaming Democrats, and as ever, offering no evidence to support that.
If you count the legal votes, I easily win. If you count the illegal votes, they can try to steal the election from us. If you count the votes that came in late, we're looking at them very strongly, but a lot of votes came in late.
Meanwhile, the vote count in those key remaining states continued.
Our goal here in Clark County is not to count fast. We want to make sure that we're being accurate.
So far, he's true to his word on not counting fast. As for accuracy, the Trump campaign challenged that today.
We are filing in federal district court here in Las Vegas. We're asking for emergency relief to stop the counting of improper votes.
Trump has launched a number of lawsuits this week, but already 2 have been full-on tossed out of court, one in Michigan, another in Georgia. Critics note Trump seems to want to have counting stopped in states where he's ahead, but wants it to continue in states where he's behind. Back at the White House tonight, Trump suggested no matter what happens with the Electoral College count, he won't go down without a fight.
We think there's going to be a lot of litigation because we have so much evidence, so much proof, and it's going to end up perhaps at the highest court in the land. We'll see. But we think there'll be a lot of litigation because we can't have an election stolen like this.
These were the first public comments by the president, Andrew, since he prematurely claimed victory on election night. So keep in mind the context of the moment. He is staring into the abyss right now. His presidency is evaporating, and he knows it.
Paul Hunter in Washington, thank you.
And so joining us now, the senior editor of The Atlantic, David Frum, former Obama administration official, Krish Vignarajah. So, Krish, Donald Trump spoke earlier tonight without evidence of illegal ballots, you know, the speech full of mischaracterizations. What did you make of what it is he had to say? Is he sort of grabbing at the hinges as some people are trying to push him out the door?
Yeah, I mean, I think that what you've seen in the last 48 hours are just acts of desperation. Their strategy seems to be throw as much as they can out there and see what sticks. The problem with that strategy is, one, it won't win, and two, it's dangerous. It's dangerous not as much because I fear for the strength of our democracy, because I have absolute faith in that. It's dangerous for the poll workers. The fact that he is targeting, this process that has been, very clearly policed and careful, is dangerous to those people because we see what happens when he speaks. When he said free Michigan, you had people targeting Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer. When he said welcome Kamala Harris in Texas, you had his supporters try to drive the bus off the road. And so when he starts suggesting that this is an illegitimate process, those words mean something, and they could put the lives, of these individuals or, risk harm to people who are simply going out there, doing their jobs and trying to protect democracy.
And David, it was interesting watching this news conference because several American networks just cut him off, just completely cut him off and stopped airing it, started fact-checking him. I'm wondering, what is the risk, do you interpret, of what he's just done?
Well, in the olden days when I used to help politicians with this kind of thing, you would make them watch their performances with the sound off. Because they needed to understand that most people are not watching TV intently. They're watching it while doing other things. They're distracted, and they're capturing the angle of the body, the look on the face. If you watch that statement with the sound off, that was a broken and defeated man. And when you watch Joe Biden's statements with the sound off, you see someone who's exuding the kind of the calm that you have when you have the numbers in your hand. And so I think everyone is sort of adjusting to the slow drift of power away from Donald Trump, and it'll happen maybe tonight, probably tomorrow. The power will just go, and although there will not be a legal result for a few days. And although, of course, the inauguration is not till January, the realities of power in Washington are remorseless, alert, and they are moving.
All right, David Frum and Krish Vignarajah, thanks very much.
Thank you.
So we showed you Donald Trump just a few minutes ago. Well, Joe Biden spoke as well. He had a message for Americans. Susan Ormiston is in Wilmington, Delaware, near Biden headquarters. So Susan, what is Biden saying?
Well, Joe Biden's response to Trump tonight was a tweet. Keep the faith, folks, refusing to be drawn into a political street fight in public anyway over an election he believes he's won.
Good afternoon, folks.
The signaling from Joe Biden and his team is clear.
We continue to feel, Senator and I, we continue to feel very good about where things stand. We have no doubt that when the count is finished, Senator Harris and I will be declared the winners. So I ask everyone to stay calm. All the people to stay calm.
The count is all important, but they're confident the trend is going their way and they will reach the magic 270 mark. It has been a 48-hour seesaw for voters.
Last night before I went to bed, it sounded like Biden had Arizona, and I think when I got up this morning, it was Trump had Arizona.
Pro-Trump protests have popped up in several parts of the country. In Philadelphia, the largest block of votes still need to be fully tabulated, but Trump's lead in Pennsylvania is narrowing.
What I can tell you is
Biden's legal team is gearing up to fight his lawsuits.
All of this is intended to create a large cloud that it is the hope of the Trump campaign that nobody can see through, but it is not a very thick cloud. It's not hard to see what they're doing. We see through it.
Biden's been mostly working from his Delaware home in a wealthy suburb of Wilmington down this road. Outside a Wilmington cafe, Cass Ledyard, a Biden supporter, says his first election will go down in the history books.
I thought Donald Trump was I thought he was gonna win. Most of the people around me vote for Trump, but I'm really happy that Joe's looking good. He's looking a lot better than I thought he would.
It all has an air of quiet momentum. The press gathered for Biden's departure tonight after a coronavirus briefing. We could see a decision soon.
All right, so the watching continues. What do you know, Susan, about the next steps in all of this, about what tomorrow might look like for Biden?
Yeah, well, every day it's been tomorrow, hasn't it? I can say this set in the parking lot is hot. They've been testing the monitors, the stage, the video. So we might see something tomorrow, but they can't preempt the vote. After all the focus Biden has put on democracy and following the process, Joe Biden has to be patient too.
All right, Susan Ormiston in Wilmington, Delaware. Thanks, Susan.
Now let's go to Stephen D'Souza in the state of Pennsylvania. Key to this race, hotly contested, and that played out on the ground with supporters of both candidates in a standoff today in Philadelphia. So, Stephen, you're in Scranton, Joe Biden's hometown. What did you find there?
We found a town that's very much like the rest of the state and the rest of the country, deeply divided. And even though this is Joe Biden's hometown, it didn't mean he sailed to victory here, because we are still very much deep in the heart of Trump country. At Joe Biden's favorite hoagie shop, his image is everywhere. But just across the street, a sign of the state's divide. Biden was born here, grew up in this home until he was 10. The site has become a political pilgrimage for some.
Very exciting feeling, you know, it makes you think what you could do with your own life.
Biden campaigned heavily on his working class roots here.
On my drive home, it's nothing but Trump. Out, you know, the normal working class people.
But not everyone is pulling for the hometown boy.
Well, honestly, he's been a politician for how long? He's really never done anything. And plus he hid in his bunker all COVID long. I mean, I don't have any respect for someone like that.
Across the street and across the vast political divide, Anna Colleen says she can't believe Pennsylvania didn't send a stronger message to Donald Trump.
We have a lot of work to do. If it's still this close after the chaos that has been over the last 4 years, I think we have to really look at what we could do to make this country a lot better.
Biden won this area by just 8 points, hardly a sweeping statement. Trump's total vote here actually grew from 2016's. This local freelance journalist says that's because Trump has the stronger appeal to the working class.
They see themselves as tossed aside, disenfranchised. Traditionally, the Democrats were associated with the friend of the working man. They helped the working class. In many people's minds now, lifelong Democrats, that has changed.
Anna Colleen knows that feeling and divide won't disappear overnight if Biden becomes president.
So I'm hopeful, and I'm looking forward to Biden listening to the people again, listening to the people in the country, and hopefully we could make this figure it out.
So, Stephen, in terms of finishing the vote count in Pennsylvania, what's the outlook?
Well, for officials, the finish line is within sight. They say the overwhelming majority of votes will be done by tomorrow and counted, and they're hoping that there will be a result that may bring comfort for some, but controversy for others.
Finish line in sight. I think I've heard that one before. Stephen D'Souza, thank you very much.
From the Keystone State, let's go to another key state, Georgia, where the gap has been tightening for more than 24 hours. Katie Simpson is at State Farm Arena in Atlanta. That is where they are counting the votes, I gather. So, Katie, what's happening where you are?
Well, the president's supporters are still out here, and they're claiming something suspicious has gone on because it's taking so long to get that vote count done. Calls for calm and patience here in Georgia are being ignored by the Trump campaign as the president has watched his slim lead fade away today. The president's supporters in Georgia are energized and angry.
They ain't taking it from us!
Gathering outside the Atlanta arena where ballots are tabulated, they questioned the integrity of the voting system.
This is absurd. We're sitting here, I mean, how many days ago was the election?
Tuesday it should have been called.
Yeah, it should have been called Tuesday.
Emotions here are raw as supporters have watched Donald Trump's lead slowly dwindle, and along with it, his chances of re-election.
Why are you stopping the vote? You're racist. Stop racist. Let them count. Let them count the vote. Every vote counts. Every vote counts.
The Trump campaign leaned into those tensions. The president's son traveled to Atlanta to complain about how long the vote count is taking and to accuse Democrats of cheating the system, suggesting more legal challenges are to come.
Fight each and every one of these battles to the death so that we get full transparency in the process. And everyone on the Democrat side should welcome this unless they're actually cheating.
But the counting process is going as planned, say elections officials, who are trying to turn the temperature down.
In this state, we have taken the steps at every level to secure that vote and make sure the integrity of the ballot is protected.
Making pleas for patience. They say it's normal for a vote count to take this long because of the surge in absentee ballots cast in the pandemic.
Fast is great, and we appreciate fast. We more appreciate accuracy. Accuracy is going to be the bedrock upon which people will believe the outcomes of these elections.
The president suffered another setback here in Georgia today. His campaign had launched a lawsuit claiming that about 50 ballots were counted in error, that they had arrived past the deadline cutoff, and that the law was broken. But a judge today looked at the claim and tossed it out, saying there's no evidence to prove it. Adrian.
All right, Katie Simpson in Atlanta, Georgia. Thanks, Katie.
Okay, let's go to Arizona now, where Joe Biden is still hanging on to a narrowing lead. David Common is in Phoenix for us. So David, let's start, if we could, with the protesters that we saw outside the election office last night. I mean, what's the situation there today?
Once again, seeing them again here tonight. You see them in behind me, a large group, couple of hundred people. Once again, some people armed, but they say they are peaceful, and it has been that. They're reciting the Oath of Allegiance or Pledge of Allegiance right now. This is the parking lot for where the vote count itself happens, just inside this building over here. And earlier this evening, they released some numbers that show the gap, the margin between Joe Biden and Donald Trump has shrunk just ever so slightly. The folks here saying they're here to protect democracy.
The tranquility of the desert morning could not be more stark from last night. Trump supporters, some armed, protesting outside this vote counting center.
America will not fall to communism and socialism.
They allege fraud and voter suppression, demanding entry to see the count themselves. Sheriff's deputies blocking them. Inside, the slow process of counting continued. Joe Biden starting today with a slight lead, though with nearly 450,000 ballots still to count statewide this morning. Machines in this center could handle just 8,000 an hour.
I'm talking about bona fide voter fraud.
Meanwhile, outside, protesters returned confronting election workers.
Who knows if somebody voted 10 times, 2 times?
How can they vote 10 times? How can they get 10 ballots?
I don't know.
Where do they get?
I don't know.
The guns returned too, all legal here.
You're not worried about division?
It's long overdue, another civil war in this country, in all honesty.
In neighboring Nevada, also razor close in the count, Trump's team launched legal action.
It is unacceptable in this country to have illegal votes counted, and that is what's happening in the state of Nevada.
They allege dead people were counted as voting and parroting the president that Republican votes were dismissed. Back in Phoenix, Democrat Alexandra Cortez made a plea.
We need to stand together, and whether one or the other wins, we have to be a nation.
Okay, so David, how close are officials there to knowing the winner in Arizona?
Well, it's going to be days, certainly, before they get to the point where they can get through these hundreds of thousands of votes that still have yet to be counted. That's key in all of this. The question, of course, is once they are counted, when there are results here, does this kind of thing go away? And the question, or the answer to that, is quite likely not. I would point out right now they're playing the song YMCA. So jubilation, enthusiasm here tonight, in contrast to something a bit more aggressive that we saw last night and have seen elsewhere in the United States. Worries about whether that peace, that last one I was speaking about, will be achievable. Andrew?
Okay, thank you, David.
All right, welcome back. Votes are still being counted tonight in some states with very tight races. The magic number needed to win, you keep hearing this, 270 electoral college votes. So you can see behind me where things stand. Joe Biden has 253, Donald Trump 214. So the wait will only end when those numbers change as key states finally post results. But will that be the end of the strife, of the conflict? President Trump has launched several lawsuits. He has demanded recounts. So, Ian, what impact could that have?
It ain't over till the Supreme Court weighs in, right? That was your experience back in 2000. And sure enough, recounts and lawsuits are something we're hearing a lot about. So in terms of recounts, let's look at Wisconsin, a state that Joe Biden has won, but Donald Trump has said he wants a recount. It's entirely within his legal right. A candidate can demand a recount in Wisconsin if the margin of victory is less than 1%. The margin of victory here was 0.6 of 1 percentage point. But it's one thing to get a recount. It's another thing for the recount to move anything. And if you look back at 2016, the third candidate in the presidential race, the third place candidate, demanded a recount. All of the ballots in Wisconsin were reviewed, and in the end, all that did is increase Donald Trump's lead by 137. And so the experts say that recounts may move 100 or 200 votes, almost certainly not more than 1,000, and definitely not more than 10,000. Joe Biden won Wisconsin by 20,000, so a recount likely won't have much of an impact. In terms of lawsuits, Katie Simpson mentioned one in Georgia. It's interesting because it dealt with just a handful of mail-in ballots, and the court ended up saying that the Trump lawsuit trying to invalidate them just didn't have any evidence. But it's an example of how these can be small, they can be time-consuming. In Pennsylvania, though, we know that state is pivotal. It's a must-win state, as I said earlier, for Donald Trump. It has 20 electoral college votes. There are multiple lawsuits, and in at least 2 cases, a bundle of ballots have been set aside. Segregated is how it's described. In one case, because a state court allowed the deadline for those ballots to be extended by 3 days, the Supreme Court of the United States said, wait a sec, we may want to review this. And so, Adrian and Andrew, for now, those ballots have been put aside. And in a state that is so close, where 20 electoral college votes hang in the balance, that could have a big impact.
Yeah, that's key. Ian, thanks very much. So this is a good time. Let's bring in former Obama administration official Krish Omara-Vignarajah. And joining Krish, we have Kelly Jane Torrance, a Canadian, a conservative who sits on the editorial board of the New York Post. So, Kelly, I would really like to start with you, because I'd like to get your reaction to Donald Trump's statement earlier today. As you know, I'm sure you're watching, he continued to make claims of voter fraud. He continued to say a lot of stuff without evidence. What went through you? Can you walk me through what went through you when you heard it?
Yeah, you know, Donald Trump is not the best sometimes at actually stating his own case. There are actually many cases that I've seen that there are questions about the vote and how it's been counted, how it's been dealt with. Donald Trump does not help matters when he really says that the whole election is in doubt, that the whole process is in doubt. There are some small cases that people have pointed out. I mean, we had, numbers coming out of Michigan where overnight they found, 139,000, 428, whatever it was, votes for Biden, 0 for Trump. That was later said to be a typo. So there are things like that that do look concerning, but it's not an overwhelming amount of those sorts of things. And to, say that this is a fraudulent election, not helpful. But at the same time, I found that people's reaction to that, the idea that Donald Trump is undermining the whole election and the rule of law by wanting, the courts to look at it. Every candidate would want the courts to look at it. And Joe Biden, even before the election, also lawyered up because they suspected there could be a close election and it could go down to legal issues. So this is not something surprising. We've seen in many cases. And, as your reporter said, when the margins are so small in some of these places, they do have a legal right to ask for a recount. So I think people are exaggerating a little. Donald Trump saying that he has some doubts about some of the counts and wanting the courts to look at it. It is not Donald Trump saying, I'm not leaving office, you can't get rid of me. He was certainly somber at his press conference, and I think that does show that he is a little worried about the results, and he's looking to lawyers.
Yeah, I think I certainly hear you. I think saying he had doubts is perhaps more generous than he was with some of the words he was using. He was strong enough with his falsehoods that some of the networks had to cut away. And I'm curious, Krish, we are seeing in this process of trying to discredit the votes, like the mail-in ballots, which he voted by mail, incidentally. A lot of these lawsuits, not all, but a lot of these lawsuits look like they have been thrown out. If Biden manages to hit the 270, and we don't know if that will happen, is there any way you think for Donald Trump to actually litigate his way out of a defeat?
I don't think so. As you just described, the lawsuits that have been filed thus far have been largely unsuccessful. There is no culpable claim that we've seen presented thus far, or evidence that the president or his campaign have referred to suggest that there is any validity in a substantial way that would suggest that any of the state determinations would be overturned. So I think, the strategy seems to be to litigate this in the kind of the public courtroom. But beyond mobilizing the mob of Trump supporters, I don't think he's going to get very far.
So, Kelly, it's interesting watching some of these margins, as you say, in so many places are so tight. No matter what happens, it just exposes this fracture point in the country. And I'm curious, for either team, Trump or Biden, how on earth do you govern after this?
That's a great question, Adrienne. And I don't think it's helpful when you have so many pundits and politicians on the Democratic side calling nearly half the country racist. You had an article in the New York Times that said minorities voting for Trump proves white supremacy because they're standing with their oppressors. 538, which is one of the most well-regarded, election analyst sites in the United States, their top political writer called Trump voters racist. I don't think that's helpful, and I don't think that's wise for the Democrats. If they want to govern for all of America and they want to try to persuade those voters so they don't have such a close election in the future, I don't think calling them racist is helpful. And actually, Trump did better in every demographic group in 2020 as opposed to 2016, except for white men. That was the only group he actually lost ground on. He gained 4 points in black men and women. He gained 3 points in Hispanic men and women, the exit polls show, and I suspect the Hispanic number will turn out to be higher. The Republicans actually took 2 House seats from the Democrats thanks to Hispanic turnout. The idea that people are only voting for Donald Trump because they're racist is not a way to heal any divisions and to try to bring people together. People are voting for Trump for various reasons. A lot of them are voting for him because they like his policies. And so, going forward, calling out the country racist is not helpful. And it does show that Joe Biden's policies were not convincing to a lot of people. And so there's a lot of work to be done. And I do worry that even just the last few days, what we've seen before the election's even decided has really divided things further.
All right, Christian Kelly, I could listen to you all day. We can't, though. Thank you for your time tonight. I have no doubt we will speak with you again very soon.
Well, since Election Day, nearly 40% of Donald Trump's tweets have been labeled by Twitter as misleading. Still, the president's accusations of electoral fraud keep coming from him and others. And Thomas Daigle looks at how those claims are still being amplified exponentially on social media.
This is not a fair election.
There are plenty of dubious videos out there that would have you believe U.S. election officials really are up to something. Take this one, shot at a vote counting center in Detroit.
You wouldn't be able to trust that just because some ballots could fly off the back.
Purporting to show a man wheeling a wagon carrying fraudulent ballots.
Wow!
Except a local TV station easily debunked that video.
The wagon, we have it right here. This is what it looks like. It was carrying, as it is now, equipment for our crews who were working long hours.
Stop the steal!
Those online rumors are having a real-world impact. Facebook just took down a group organizing protests claiming the election was being stolen. 365,000 members had joined in just one day.
Disinformation can spread quite rapidly and then be screenshot and shared again and again through different accounts and via different networks.
Twitter and other platforms may label misleading posts, but there are ways around the filters. Consider this Trump tweet, #BidenCrimeFamily, a slogan used to spread false claims. Notice family is misspelled, likely on purpose.
In an attempt to get around platform mitigation, because that's the power of these kind of viral pieces of misinformation. Once they're stuck in there, they sound correct.
We are not prepared to give that number.
This press conference disrupted with that potent slogan.
The Biden crime family stealing this election. The media's covering it up.
Illustrating how those words can spark danger. So it's no wonder why the head of U.S. cybersecurity had this warning.
I'd ask all Americans to be patient, to treat all sensational and unverified claims with skepticism.
They are watching for trouble amid an unresolved election. Thomas Daigle, CBC News, Toronto.
Americans are not alone in waiting for their election results. So is the rest of the world, including the country's international partners who have a lot riding on the result. Margaret Evans looks at the impact of this tumultuous election on U.S. alliances and reputation.
Old friends, Winston Churchill and Franklin D. Roosevelt, immortalized on a London street. Symbols of the transatlantic alliance born of World War II and still pulled out and re-examined here with each turn of the page in U.S. presidential history. But few administrations have caused quite as much consternation for their allies as Donald J. Trump's has. This week's roller coaster of an election, no exception.
The gloss is off the rose for a lot of America's key partners.
Analysts say the depth of division exposed by the election means domestic issues will preoccupy the next administration, whatever its political stripe. If not by design, then of necessity.
For the rest of the world, there's going to be concern that this means that America is going to put its international commitments even further down the pipeline of its priorities.
Donald Trump has shunned the multilateralism of his allies. But critics say the bitter election scenes stateside are just as damaging to the country's image, especially amongst those looking to the U.S. as an example.
Something that we normally experience in Africa. Can this happen in a country that has seen democracy for centuries?
Washington's handling of COVID-19 hasn't helped either, according to a survey of European countries.
Perception to the US had dropped massively everywhere, and also perceptions of the US as an ally on handling the crisis were extremely low.
A weak Washington, of course, will of necessity weaken its allies too. And it begs a familiar question. If the United States can't or won't take on the role of world leader, who or what fills the vacuum? Margaret Evans, CBC News, London.
In Phoenix, Arizona, Trump supporters rallied last night outside the building where votes are being counted. It is crucial math. The state's 11 electoral college votes hang in the balance. According to the latest returns, Biden's lead has narrowed but appears to be holding. CBC's David Common reporting for us from Phoenix. David, Arizona, right? It's proven to be a very important state in this election. So what is the latest on this tight race?
It is tight, as you say, Asha, and getting tighter. As a result of counting that took place overnight, we now see, once again, fewer than 100,000 votes separating Joe Biden and Donald Trump. Biden continues to have the lead, but that lead has been narrowing as more of these ballots have been counted. Now, these are not ballots that were cast on Election Day. Those have all been counted. They're mail-in ballots, provisional ballots, other ballots that still have to be counted. While I say there's less than 100,000 vote difference between them, there's still, at least 300,000 votes that still need to be counted right around this state. That process continuing today. And so what is a tight race is continuing to be tight as that vote count process continues.
And we've seen election tensions boiling over in Phoenix. I mean, I was checking your updates on Twitter. We've seen it on TV. You were at that protest outside the vote counting center last night. Tell us what happened.
Absolutely. It actually began with a smaller group that made its way inside the vote count center and were alleging that their votes had been disqualified. There's actually a way for voters in this state to be able to see whether they've been disqualified, so it's possible that that did happen. That group was then ejected from the facility after raising their voices. They made their way over to the Capitol, met a larger group, which then came back to the vote center. You see here in pictures now that there are people in that crowd, some of them armed, which is quite legal here in Arizona, not wearing masks in spite of the fact that Arizona is very hard hit. At least 26 people are dying here in Phoenix alone every single day. But besides the COVID issue, the primary issue for this crowd is they believe that their votes are being thrown away, cast aside, disqualified, and they believe Donald Trump should be elected here in this state. They look at that margin and are protesting quite loudly, waving flags, insisting that the vote here continue, but they want more supervision of that vote. So while you hear the president this morning saying and tweeting, stop the count, he's saying that specifically about states in which he is already ahead, even marginally, even where there are votes still to be counted. Here in Arizona, his team is making the opposite approach. He is slightly behind here, and they want the vote to continue, but with greater supervision. Certainly quite a bit of tension there last night. No violence that we saw, but there were instances of yelling back and forth between Joe Biden supporters and Donald Trump supporters in other parts of the city, sometimes quite loud and quite tense.
Well, it's good that it did not escalate because, as you were mentioning, I mean, that is an open carry state, right? So there were people there armed. Thanks, David. CBC's David Common reporting from Phoenix, Arizona.
Good evening. It's been called one of the most important and consequential U.S. elections in history. And yet, 2 days after Americans casted their ballots in record numbers, we're no closer to knowing with any certainty who will be occupying the White House from January next year. The battle all comes down to the final few remaining key swing states. Joe Biden only needs to win one of them to be named the next U.S. president. And we've got our election analyst, Jeremy. He's joining us in the studio now to talk us through the current state of play. What does it look like at the moment?
Well, Ollie, tens of millions of votes have already been cast and counted. Dozens of these states have already projected for one of the other candidates. But there's really still everything to play for here, Ollie, because we're coming down to the wire. There's just 5 states that we have not projected for either one of these candidates. Alaska, of course, very heavily expected to go to this man, Donald Trump. But the other 4 still in play are very important, and they're so consequential because if you look at Joe Biden's electoral vote total there, Ollie, 264 out of 270. He just needs one of these 4 states to be named the next president-elect of the president-elect of the United States. Donald Trump would need to win all 4 to keep the keys to the White House.
Now, the easiest route for Joe Biden would be to take Nevada, wouldn't it? Let's start off with Nevada, and then we'll have a look at Pennsylvania.
That's right, Ollie, and we're expecting results from Nevada, in fact, any minute now. They have said that they're going to release results at the top of the hour, so those could come in any time. And you can see just how razor-thin the margin is in this state, Ollie. Less than 8,000 votes separating these 2 candidates. 6 electoral votes here. That's all Joe Biden needs to get to the victory point in this race. Such a crucial race here in Nevada. And most of the votes that are going to come that still remain are from the Las Vegas region. So they should be more urban voters coming in at this point, and those have trended towards Joe Biden. So that could be enough to hang on to his lead here. The other important state I want to talk about, let's move out to the Northeast, where we have Pennsylvania. This has been such a controversial state in this election. This is a blue wall state, traditionally Democratic for years, stolen by the GOP in 2016, a huge coup for the Republicans. When it started out, the counting here, Donald Trump had a big lead, but a lot of that mail-in ballots, absentee ballots started coming in, and Joe Biden has made a strong push towards the end here. Now we have just 125,000 votes separating the 2. A lot of the votes left to come here, Oliver, from Philadelphia. That's an urban region, as I said, trending towards Biden, so we could see him close that gap in the remaining couple days that votes are expected to be counted in Pennsylvania.
Now, the other 2 key battleground states are in the South. Usually, they are true red states. We're talking about Georgia and North Carolina here. But the gap seems to be narrowing between Trump and Biden.
That's right, Ollie. This is a traditionally a Republican state. Georgia, 16 electoral votes up for grabs here. Absolute must-win for Donald Trump, as is everything on the board at this point. We just heard from electoral officials there just a little while ago. In fact, they say that 60,000 votes are left to be counted. There's just about a 15,000 differential between these 2 candidates, so it could swing this vote either way. A lot of those remaining votes are in the Atlanta region. That's another urban region. We talked about this rural-urban divide with more rural voters trending towards Donald Trump, urban voters going towards Joe Biden. So whether or not Joe Biden can close that gap will depend on how those Atlanta voters cast their ballots. Of course, those officials that we heard speak just a little while ago, they said that, speed is a priority, but accuracy is the most important thing. And there's one last state I want to talk about, Ollie. That is North Carolina, just north of Georgia, another traditionally Republican state. This is one state that we will probably be waiting on. We might not see final results until next week at the earliest. They're still processing those mail-in ballots, so Monday or Tuesday more likely for North Carolina. But if Joe Biden can take one of those other states, it won't matter which direction North Carolina goes in. And finally, let's bring up these 2 candidates on the wall, where they stand for a recap here. So Joe Biden, 264 electoral college votes. Just 6 more he needs to get the keys to the White House. Donald Trump still has a ways to go, but he is still competitive in all of these states, so we could see him make a push in these final hours. We're going to keep across these numbers and see what comes in.
Jeremy East, a thrilling, if not a long race to the White House so far. Thank you very much.
America's NATO allies in Europe will be eagerly awaiting the 2020 presidential election results, as transatlantic relations have been somewhat strained since Donald Trump took office. Early on in his presidency, he described NATO as obsolete, seriously alarming European allies, some of whom feel increasingly threatened at their borders. And Trump's approach hasn't always been the best for the unity of the continent, as one analyst describes.
What Donald Trump has done these 4 years has been to prioritize bilateral relations over multilateral ones, and this divides Europe. Donald Trump has strengthened ties on the defense area with Eastern European countries like Poland, but not with the others. If Donald Trump follows, this is going to be accentuated.
Trump's supporters often say he should be judged by his actions rather than his words. In Poland, during 2017, he oversaw the largest deployment of US troops since the Cold War. But he's also threatened to pull military personnel out of Germany after demanding Europe contribute more money towards NATO, an accusation he has consistently leveled at allies.
I think a lot of people in the United States feel that the rest of the world has been living at their expense, particularly at their expense in the matter of national security. And there's some validity in that. Europe is not pulling its weight as far as providing for its own defense is concerned, and is relying on the United States NATO guarantee. So he has some grounds for his attitudes.
But with a Biden presidency, things could be very different for NATO. It could see his administration pumping more money into the organization in order to combat what he sees as the West's greatest threat, Russia.
Joe Biden does want to lean on European allies. Joe Biden has said that he's going to be very tough on Russia, and that means he needs NATO. And he has said that he will invest in NATO and also in NATO capacities to deal with Russia.
Whoever emerges victorious from the 2020 election, European NATO allies will be watching closely as the United States chooses its next commander-in-chief. Christopher Pitchers, Euronews, Brussels.
Almost 4 years of Donald Trump have left America's European allies in a state of shock. He's walked out of hugely important treaties.
The fact is, this was a horrible one-sided deal that should have never, ever been made.
He's lashed out at America's friends.
Now, if you look at it, Germany is a captive of Russia.
And he's cozied up to authoritarians.
Final question.
The idea driving all this, America first, has emanated from Trump's Washington and from embassies all over the world, like here in Berlin. And the effect has been profound, even throwing the basis of the American-led Western alliance into question.
America first, in a way, meant that the US administration would abdicate that role of the leader of the transatlantic and Western alliance.
When you're an alliance that is, founded on deterrence, you want to look like you've got your ducks in a row. It's very hard to have your ducks in a row when one of them is Donald Trump.
In this video, we're going to find out just how much Donald Trump has disrupted transatlantic relations. First, by abandoning the most important international treaties of our time, and then by threatening NATO, the bedrock of America's global power. It adds up to diplomatic disruption on an unprecedented scale. But as we'll find out, even for America's shell-shocked allies, it's not all bad.
It was a rather healthy wake-up call for the Europeans and also for the Germans.
And finally, we're going to ask, what does the future hold for transatlantic relations, no matter who wins the White House? But first, let's go back to the beginning of the story and an almighty break with the past.
Trump's inauguration made it absolutely clear that under him, things were going to be different.
From this day forward, a new vision will govern our land. From this day forward, it's going to be only America first. America first.
Peter Wittich was Germany's ambassador to the United States at the time. He'd also served as ambassador to the United Nations, a man who'd seen it all. But even for him, this was new territory.
We knew that Trump was an outsider, and we knew that he would disrupt a lot of the structures in Washington. But we only really got a glimpse of what he really wanted to achieve when we heard his inauguration speech in January 2017. And this was, in a way, quite a shocking experience. And there he laid out a rather somber view not only of America, but of what we used to call the West. And it spelled out clearly what America first would mean for us. So that was really a rather radical wake-up call for diplomats in Washington and for myself personally.
The omens that followed were not good. On Angela Merkel's first trip to the Trump White House 2 months later, the new president appeared reluctant even to shake her hand. Things quickly got serious with Trump's first major move against the diplomatic order.
In order to fulfill my solemn duty to protect America and its citizens, the United States will withdraw from the Paris Climate Accord Thank you.
The Paris Accord is the global pact to cut greenhouse gas emissions in the hope of preventing catastrophic climate change. It was the culmination of decades of international negotiations. 195 nations signed it. France's president even called it a beautiful revolution. Trump's decision was a massive blow. His predecessor had been central to hammering out the deal in the first place. As an expert who was closely involved in the whole process explains.
It was absolutely crucial that the Obama administration supported the Paris Agreement. The Obama administration played an instrumental role to get China on board and to support a meaningful contribution from China to the Paris Agreement. And without the US, we wouldn't have got the Paris Agreement.
But Trump insisted that the agreement was unfair to the US. He said he would try to negotiate a new deal. Nothing became of that. But despite the setback, the Paris Agreement did remain intact. With the real effects of climate change being felt around the globe, the rest of the world stuck by the deal. Still, Trump's decision left allies in Europe appalled.
I think one can say this is one of the topics that alienated the most in terms of losing sympathy in Europe for the Trump administration. It really pointed to a fundamental difference in the approach to environmental protection, and I think that really created a big rift also in the mindset of the people.
The next big rift came just a year later, when Trump announced he was pulling out of another landmark treaty, the Iran nuclear deal.
The fact is, this was a horrible one-sided deal that should have never, ever been made.
The Iran deal of 2015 was designed to prevent the Islamic Republic from developing a nuclear weapon, with Tehran scaling back its nuclear program in return for relief from sanctions. Trump said that the deal failed to keep Iran in check. But for European leaders, his decision squandered a hard-won diplomatic victory.
It wasn't just a deal involving the US and the Europeans, but most importantly also, of course, Russia and China, and of course, Iran. And the fact that all those nations could have agreed in such a delicate issue on a deal that we considered a major achievement.
Trump's disregard for these landmark treaties was particularly galling here in Germany, where there's a profound belief in multilateralism as the right approach to global problems.
In Germany, with 2 world wars and the Nazi rule, they find themselves in a situation where any national approach to foreign policy, to international relations, is totally discredited, from a German point of view. So for us, this downgrading of multilateral cooperation that the Trump administration pursued is particularly hard to take.
On top of that, there was another Trump threat to something even more profound to America's European allies, the alliance that underpinned their relationship, NATO. Trump swept into NATO with the same abandon he'd shown over Paris and Iran. At his first summit in 2017, he even appeared to push the Montenegrin prime minister out of the way. But it was the following year that the fireworks really began, when Trump took part in a breakfast that has become NATO folklore. Sitting across the table from NATO's Secretary General, Trump launched into a tirade against Germany's heavy use of Russian natural gas.
Now, if you look at it, Germany is a captive of Russia because they got rid of their coal plants, they got rid of their nuclear. They're getting so much of the oil and gas from Russia. I think it's something that NATO has to look at. I think it's very inappropriate. You and I agree that it's inappropriate. I don't know what you can do about it now, but it certainly doesn't seem to make sense that they pay billions of dollars to Russia, and now we have to defend them against Russia.
DW NATO correspondent Terry Schultz was there.
The breakfast was quite a shocking way to start the day. This was due to be just a simple photo op.
He's screaming at Secretary General Stoltenberg across the table about Germany being a captive of Russia. And you just remember looking at these pictures of President Trump and all his aides on the side of the table, and the rest of them, including Secretary Pompeo at the time, sort of looked at their plate.
It didn't make for a happy atmosphere, and Angela Merkel fired back with what was by her low-key standards a stinging rebuke.
Ich möchte aus gegebenem Anlass hinzufügen, dass ich erlebt habe auch selber, dass ein Teil Deutschlands von der Sowjetunion kontrolliert wurde. Und ich bin sehr froh, dass wir heute in Freiheit vereint sind als die Bundesrepublik Deutschland und dass wir deshalb auch sagen können, dass wir unsere eigenständige Politik machen können und eigenständige Entscheidungen fällen können, und das ist sehr gut.
The whole episode caused such a stir that NATO started making arrangements to try to make sure it couldn't happen again.
And since then, all meetings at NATO that were going to involve President Trump have been scaled back to minimize the amount of time he's going to be on the ground. I mean, the average person watching may not notice, but you don't call meetings of NATO leaders summits anymore because they fear that would give too much of a spotlight to the event. And so it might be used by the Trump administration, as a platform for either attacking the alliance itself or being used as a podium for some other issue.
But there is substance to Trump's problem with NATO. That Germany and many other European member states don't spend nearly as much on defense as they've promised to.
Many presidents have complained about this over the years, just none as aggressively as Trump. And it seems that his approach has had some effect.
I don't think that the Europeans did take it seriously until President Trump scared the, living daylights out of them, that he would pull the troops home in retaliation if they didn't. So that's not a bad thing. That's not a bad thing for NATO. It's not a bad thing for the countries themselves. Remember, we're talking about investment in their own defense budgets that then benefits NATO.
It was a rather healthy wake-up call for the Europeans and also for the Germans to not free ride in terms of, let's say, defense spending and not rely always on the US to provide protection, but to be on their own in terms of the European Union, for instance, get our act together. Spend more on defense, develop a defense union that deserves its name.
And yet Trump's approach has sometimes appeared to border on the vindictive. Earlier this year, he announced that he would pull thousands of troops out of Germany. Berlin was not even notified in advance.
This was a clear slap at the German government. And what that does is it just adds a feeling of unease through the alliance about what might happen next.
So what is the outlook for the Western alliance?
Let's revisit Inauguration Day for a moment and that rallying cry that's defined Trump's foreign policy.
A new vision will govern our land. From this day forward, it's going to be only America first. America first.
That slogan, America First, calls to mind a famous saying in international affairs. It comes from this man, Lord Palmerston, Prime Minister in 19th century Britain. He said, "We have no eternal allies. Our interests are eternal, and those interests it is our duty to follow." That idea that interests are more important than allies really sums up America First. Germany's former ambassador to the US, Peter Wittich, says that Europeans will have to adapt to that if Trump gets re-elected.
We would have to realize that in core spheres of our values, we would not be seeing eye to eye, but that would not or should not prevent us from pursuing common interests. For instance, when it comes to Russian hybrid warfare, or when it comes to Chinese practices in its new assertiveness.
But it's those shared values that underpin the trust at the heart of the Western alliance. Without them, can it survive? That's the nagging question here in Europe. And little wonder that most European governments are quietly hoping that Biden will win.
We want to see a restoration of American moral and political leadership of our alliance of what used to be called the West. And secondly, we want to have a friendly and well-meaning conversation about the issues that we want to tackle.
Those issues include climate change and the situation with Iran. And Biden has promised to re-enter the Paris Agreement and said he's open to rejoining the Iran deal too. That's music to the ears of European diplomats. But for Peter Wittich, most important of all, would be a return to that sense of shared values.
Just the simple fact of respect and decency, returning to the behavior between allies, that would be a big step forward to restore trust and to restore a common sense of purpose of what we are as like-minded partners that uphold values of democracy and pluralism and human rights and rule of law and environmental protection. And this is, I think, what many people in Europe are craving for.
Over at Nato, DW's longtime correspondent Terry Schultz says people there are hoping for something more mundane. They just want the surprises to stop.
This is not only because of what policies Biden may or may not have, it's simply because he is seen as a more predictable partner. I just can't emphasize enough how much of this angst in Europe is not even about the policies that President Trump announces, but simply about the fact that you never know where they're coming from. You don't know what they're fueled by.
This is the swirl of disorientation, of disappointment, and sheer exhaustion that America's European allies are caught up in after 4 years of Donald Trump. So it hardly seems surprising that they're hoping to see him leave the White House. If he doesn't, well, buckle up. Another 4 years of this, and the transatlantic relationship could look very different.
Our goal now is to ensure the integrity for the good of this nation. This is a very big moment. This is a major fraud in our nation. We want the law to be used in a proper manner. So we'll be going to the U.S. Supreme Court.
Senator Harris and I just completed briefings on both COVID and the economic crisis facing this nation. And we're reminded again of the severity of this pandemic. Cases are on the rise nationwide, and we're nearing 240,000 deaths due to COVID. And our hearts go out to each and every family that has lost a loved one to this terrible disease. In America, the vote is sacred. It's how people of this nation express their will. And it is the will of the voters, no one, not anything else, that chooses the President of the United States of America. So each ballot must be counted. And that's what we're going to see going through now. And that's how it should be. Democracy is sometimes messy. It sometimes requires a little patience as well. But that patience has been rewarded now for more than 240 years with a system of governance that's been the envy of the world. And we continue to feel, Senator and I, we continue to feel very good about where things stand. We have no doubt that when the count is finished, Senator Harris and I will be declared the winners. So I ask everyone to stay calm, all the people to stay calm. The process is working. The count is being completed, and we'll know very soon. So thank you all for your patience, but we have to count the votes. God bless you all, and may God protect our troops. Thank you so much.